Hello and welcome back to TVC22's coverage of the 2021 federal elections here in Glengarry-Prescott-Russell, as we've been speaking to all of our local candidates, and today I have the absolute pleasure of welcoming the candidate, the current previous MP. Do I call you MP, or are you just a candidate these days?
No, I'm just a candidate.
There we go. Yeah. So candidate Francis Drouin, who's held the seat since 2015 here locally. Francis, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
If you couldn't guess, that was Liberal as well. I don't think I actually mentioned it. Francis, I think the best place to start is, even though that you've been very well known around the region, have been occupying this seat for multiple years now, if you could just let the people at home know a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and what your priorities would be for Glengarry-Prescott-Russell if you were re-elected.
Sure. So, well, I was born and raised in Hawkesbury. Both my dad and my grandfather went to, they did politics for 50 years combined, more my grandfather. So I often said, rather than talking about hockey at the dinner table, we talk about politics, and we try and resolve the problems of the world. And now I reside in Russell with my wife and my little kid, who's 2 years old. That's something that makes me a bit more tired during campaigns, but love him to death. My priorities have always been based on four themes: infrastructure, so growing the economy by investing in infrastructure. So whether it's partnering with a municipality to help them pay for green infrastructure, for an arena, or for something that's not really sexy like a water pipe. You don't see it, but vital infrastructure for municipalities. And the other one is access to internet. You know, Thomas, you were there when we did an announcement to connect half the riding. Priority for the next term is to connect the other half of the riding. Official languages, I do represent a community that is both majority francophone, so that's an important issue for me. Make sure that services can continue, and make sure we pass the Official Languages Modernization Act in Parliament. And standing up for farmers. Farmers represent a huge part of the riding, geographically represent 80% of the riding. So, things like making sure they have access to the business risk management program that they depend on, making sure I continue to defend supply management. We've had some programs in place, so there's farmers that will be on the chicken side, the chicken and poultry side, they'll be applying for funds to either upgrade their barns or green technologies to upgrade their barns. So that's something that I'll be working one-on-one with some of the farmers that are doing that. And I didn't mention it in the French interview, but I forgot climate change, environment. Environment's important. So how do when I look at Glengarry-Prescott-Russell, how do we decarbonize the economy? And that we can go in further discussion, but that's my four priorities.
Yeah, we'll definitely dive into those a little bit. I mean, the one priority that's not mentioned, that is not mentioned because it's quite literally the elephant in the room, is the fact that, as we have been for the last 18 months, is stuck in the middle of a global health pandemic. I think the big thing is, obviously, for whatever party takes over the governing of Canada, of the country, come next week, the main priority is going to be getting out of this pandemic, continuing the work to get out as we sit on the edge. We're riding the wave, I guess, of the fourth wave. And now, how do you see us getting through it from this point out? And I think one of the things to give the voters an idea of who they're speaking about here when they talk about you as a candidate, what is your position on mandatory vaccines? And although it's a provincial issue, what's your position on vaccine passports?
Yeah, so proof of vaccination for me is important, and we will require, in federal jurisdictions, we will require it for trains and planes. And you will probably most likely, if you're planning on traveling elsewhere, other countries are going to mandate that, and they are. So when I went, and that's not a new phenomenon, it's something that has been in place for certain countries where they have viral diseases. Yellow fever, for instance, in certain parts of Africa, I had to get 2 shots. I didn't die. 5G didn't improve, and I'm not collaborating with Bill Gates. But it's just a reality, and I understand that there are people who are tired of wearing masks. I understand that people do not want to get vaccinated. And to those who do not want to get vaccinated right now, all I can say is talk to your doctor. If you have legitimate concerns for health reasons, don't talk to me. I don't know. I didn't study in virology or epidemiology for the past 30 years. I don't know anything about that. All I know is how to tap into those expertise, and they're telling me vaccination is the best way to move forward. So do I support proof of vaccination? Absolutely. We cannot afford another shutdown of our economy. Businesses, the Ontario Chamber of Commerce is asking for a program of proof of vaccination. While we will not implement that directly, we will be helping provinces to pay for it.
And those experts, like all other medical professionals around the country, have been worked to the bone over the course of the last 18 months, with our healthcare system here in Canada really being pushed to the brink, like most places in the world who had to handle this pandemic. If re-elected, what steps would you take to ensure that the healthcare system is made more resilient, to be able to ensure that if something like this happens again, they are well equipped to handle it, taking on the warning signs of obviously the previous breakouts such as SARS back in the early 2000s, as well as ensuring that here locally in Glengarry-Prescott-Russell, we are keeping residents as safe as possible from a healthcare point of view? I'm thinking obviously mental health as well as long-term care.
Yeah, there's obviously the warning systems of the world failed. We're in a global pandemic for a reason. Otherwise, we would have seen a limited impact. But obviously, the entire world failed on this. For me, what's important, we started this pandemic, and this pandemic started, and it was hard on our seniors in long-term care centers. So for me, seeing a standard level of care. It's not normal that we should be calling our army into long-term care centers. So requiring a same level of care no matter where you live in Canada, I think is important, especially around this area where many families have families across the river. So I think if you you're living in a long-term care here, or your family brings you over to the other side, for whatever reason, you should get that same level of care. So that's why we want to create at least national standards, and there is funding to implement those standards, which will be coming which was announced in the budget 2021. The other thing is access to doctors. In rural areas, we don't have as much access to doctors. So we're saying we were going to hire 7,500 doctors and nurses. And just during the pandemic, when the Ontario government said, rightfully so, they said you can only work in one long-term care center. Well, nurses and PSWs couldn't go anywhere else after, and that's why the Red Cross was called into our riding, because we lacked nurses and PSWs, and PSWs should be probably better paid, and that's something that we're doing. We want to ensure that they're paid about $25 an hour. And in terms of mental health, we're saying mental health has impacted a lot of people. And what we're doing is creating a new transfer. So the federal government does social transfers for education, does health transfers to provinces. We don't administer that, but we do health transfers from the tax we collect. Now we're going to put a third one, the mental health transfer. So provinces can tap into that, but it has to be dedicated to mental health. And I think that is the sort of like the sleeping giant in the room right now. Mental health has been hard on people over the last 2 years.
Absolutely. And looking at long-term care there as well, just for a second, is it more important for us to invest in our current long-term care homes, PSWs, and obviously other long-term care workers? Or is it more important to start investing more into the health of citizens beforehand to try and keep them home for longer and keep them out of long-term care homes for longer?
Yeah, and that's staying at home is something I hear from seniors. They want to stay longer at home, and that funding has already been in place since 2016, I believe. It was part of our part of other health transfers that we've said. We said you can get more access to funding, but it has to be dedicated to helping seniors stay at home longer. So that question is somewhat solved, but there needs to be more investment, but we don't administer that. And there's going to be a provincial election next year, and those are legitimate questions that people can ask of their local candidates at that time.
Absolutely. And
but it's something that seniors want. The long-term care center is the last stop they want.
And we've heard from the Warden's Caucus and a variety of other organisations as well that say it has been shown that there is improved levels of care of the longer they do stay home as well. Obviously, we are talking about funding as well, as everything is. It costs money, and things cost a lot of money during the pandemic, and lives were saved with that money. But that does mean now we've got to be looking forward in a way to be able to get back on track. So what are your party's plans to balance the country's budget, tackle inflation and relaunch the economy, and what do you aim for Glengarry-Prescott-Russell to do just that? Yeah,
so in terms of making sure our finances are in good states, I want to say that Moody's is still giving us a AAA rating, and that's where we sort of have to look at. And I know a lot of people remember the 1990s. Well, in the 90s, we were at the debt to GDP ratio was at 66%, and the interest rate was at 12% back then. That's why governments had to react quickly. Fast forward to 2021, the debt to GDP ratio is at 51%, and we're going to continue on a downward track over the next few years, even though we're choosing to make investments, for instance, in childcare. So childcare, I've met many parents where some of them have not gone back to work because they realized I was working to pay childcare. And I didn't realize that, because there's a lot of people who don't do family budgets, but they said, we still have the same disposable income and I'm staying at home taking care of the kids. But we know that that has a huge impact on more women. And so if we want to get women back into the workforce, invest in childcare, and that's why we're proposing to cut them in half by next year and making them at $10 a day by 2025.
Obviously, the $10 a day thing has been something that has been spoken about a lot in a lot of the debates as well, with some candidates, some of your candidates here locally saying that's a Liberal promise that dates back to the 90s that's never been fulfilled. Why should the voters out there now believe that this is going to happen going forward?
Well, we've already signed 8 deals with provinces. The Ontario government has signaled through the Minister of Education, Minister Lecce, have signaled that he'd be ready to sign a deal with some flexibilities. So I think we're moving forward. And the other candidates, what they won't tell you is that they brought the government down in 2006 when the former NHL goalie, Ken Dryden, had signed many deals with provinces, but it wasn't the Liberal government that brought itself down back then.
And
otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about childcare today.
And another point on childcare is not only just the affordability of it, but it's the spaces as well, as we know, getting your child into a daycare, as well as flexible, because the modern day 2021 family doesn't just work your traditional 9 to 5 anymore. There are so many more flexible hours. So how important is it for you in our region to create not only affordable, but available, bilingual and flexible childcare?
Yeah, and again, we don't directly administer that, but in the deals we sign, for me, what I want to see is that a tax credit is only good for if you have a space, but we need to create more spaces. A great example of innovation within childcare services is in St. Albert. They created this co-op model, and it's open 24/7. And I think they should get access to funding, but this is great because the shift workers at the St. Albert Cheese Factory get access to childcare 24/7, and I think that's a great model that we should be supporting. And when you tell me how do you want it, what do you want to see in Glengarry-Prescott-Russell, that's exactly the type of model we should be using. And obviously, they have to get access to that funding. Yeah.
Absolutely. And another element there of the economic relaunch, to take us back a little bit, is skilled workers. We've spoken about it many times before. The agriculture industry, one of them that's a very big industry. A lot of farms in Glengarry-Prescott-Russell, as we all know, really lack that skilled workforce. So what position do you think the federal government should be held in to be able to actually rectify this issue? And how would you go about ensuring that our industries, our workforce across the region, across the country, as well as especially in the agricultural industry, is solved?
So I don't think we need to, creating more jobs is great, but right now all the entrepreneurs are talking about access to labor. So there's jobs, we just need to find the people to put them into those jobs. I sound like Bernie Sanders for a second, but so immigration is extremely important, getting our fair share of immigration in this riding. It also starts with affordable housing. So I know a lot of people are talking about CERB, and it's, CERB is creating this huge lack of access to labor. That's, I'll admit it may be a small piece of the pie, but it's not the entire pie. Affordable housing is extremely important. Immigration is important. For agriculture, temporary foreign workers are important. Streamlining that process to make it more simple, I believe, is important. And it's important to differentiate the 2 types of temporary foreign workers. There are some that are seasonal, come here, pick fruits, pick vegetables, and they go back home. But there are others where, for instance, I talk to slaughterhouses, they can't find people. So giving them a pathway to permanent residency, I think that's the smart thing to do. There are already pilot projects happening, and now we need to expand those.
And you mentioned affordable housing there as well. Like, a question on that, and although it's very provincial and municipal, what role do you see the MP's position in helping with affordable housing? Because we know there's a list as long as my arm here, with people waiting years to be able to find a safe and affordable roof over their heads.
Yeah, and I've always worked with local organizations that want to move this forward. I know I'm working with one in Vankleek Hill. I'm supporting a project there, a 30 unit for seniors, another one in Saint Albert. And I've also worked and connected some people to build housing for women who unfortunately find themselves in a situation of violence. They need to get out, and there is no emergency shelters for them here. But there's a project being brewed right now, and that's one that I'm supporting 100% to make sure. And then the other ones are, continue working with provinces and municipalities on that. And there's going to be elections next year. And that's a question that citizens, if they want to see more affordable housing, federal government does not own land here, so I can't build housing, but we have a great program to partner with, whether it's municipalities, co-ops, not-for-profits. We have a great program to support the building of housing.
The Conservative Party obviously are talking about the idea of renovating potentially government buildings, so even though you don't own land, you own buildings, and maybe converting them into housing. What do you make of that idea?
Well, that's not going to benefit Glengarry-Prescott-Russell. We don't have federal buildings here, except for Canada Post, and I don't think you can build a lot of houses in Canada Post. And the idea of using federal land from the NDP, we've also proposed that. So, and the program right now is, if there is surplus federal land, automatically the first priority goes to housing. That's already been a Government of Canada policy since 2016.
Okay, Grant, and then just want to touch on one more thing on this theme here. You mentioned CERB as well being a small element of keeping people at home. It's not an understatement to say that CERB saved countless lives over the course of the last 18 months. But one industry, for example, like the service industry, do feel like they're being harder hit by the fact that people can stay home. CERB is an emergency relief benefit, and we will have to transition off of it. So what is the Liberal government's plan, the potential next Liberal government's plan to transition away from CERB and to ensure that people are still helped in this transitional period and not left out in the cold, but at the same time are encouraged to return to the workforce?
Yeah, and right now the service industry, the restaurant industry, they're open, but they're not operating at 100% capacity, and that's part of the challenge. But that's why we're going to help them to hire people. So rather than having a CERB or the wage subsidy, we're creating a Canadian hiring credit to help them pay for that employee. And they can, maybe give them a bump up in salary to help them incentivize them to come work in your business. And the service and tourism industry, there was a lack of labor before the pandemic. Now it's just gone exponential. Like it's an issue, and I'm well aware. But to me, when you ask me as an MP, what am I going to do locally? It's get a table going. Like get a table so that conversation can happen and we can find solutions. Because I'm talking to employers. They're like, we're going directly to high schools. We're talking to high schools. I'm talking to the employment center and the local CFDC, which are saying we put some money in a pool and we're going to be advertising in areas where in Canada where the unemployment rate is high, so we can incentivize people to come here. So those are great local ideas, and how can I as an MP support those even more?
Okay, Grant.
Yep.
To go back to one of your priorities earlier, you mentioned climate change,
yep.
And obviously being the Liberal Party puts an emphasis on creating a cleaner, greener future, but has been facing some backlash recently regarding Canada's current emissions, with claims that obviously over the last 6 years, since 2015, they've gone nothing but up, being one of the countries the worst in the G7 with our own car emissions at the moment. Leader Justin Trudeau has spoken about the 2030 target, but that does seem quite far down the line. What pledge can you make to citizens of Glengarry-Prescott-Russell today, now, for the idea of whoever's in next week is going to really fight to lower our greenhouse gas emissions?
Yeah, so we have a plan to lower our greenhouse gases by 40 to 45% under 2005 levels. So that's the Paris Agreement by 2030. Most economists, most climate scientists agree that our plan is the best one. We do have to put a cap on oil and gas emissions. That's something that we are willing to do, and we will do, in order to meet our net zero by 2050, that target, net zero. So oil and gas can continue, because we're not going to transition off of oil and gas tomorrow morning. We're still going to require oil and gas over the next decade, most likely. But we are banning gas cars by 2035. So in Glengarry-Prescott-Russell, how do we ensure that we have more charging stations everywhere in the riding? Because more people are going to have electric cars. I look at the sectors of the economy. For instance, agriculture is responsible for 10% of the greenhouse gas emissions. We have a lot of funding that's available to help them buy more greener technologies, incentivize them to keep trees on their property. As we know, trees capture CO2, or wetlands. Wetlands capture twice as much CO2s as trees. So all of this, just to name a few examples, is something that I want to do. And there is a climate incentive fund because Ontario chose not to be part of the Greenhouse Price on Pollution Act. Then we get access to funding, and I'm happy to say that we've already funded 50 small businesses to help them decarbonize their operations. So that, to me, I see my work as continuing in that direction.
And we talk about absolutely the positives there of the rural wet and grasslands we have here.
Yeah.
One of the negative sides of it is obviously the connectivity issues we have. We mentioned at the start there the $1.2 billion investment that the government made in August this year to give rural internet. That's only hitting 50% of the people in our region, despite the fact that there was another project tabled by E.ON that would have tried to hit over 90%. What do you say to the people out there who are under 50%, are part of the 50% that's not going to be touched? When can they see their internet get installed? Yeah, so budget 2019, we said by 2030 we'll connect everyone. Pandemic, we've said, okay, this is serious, 2025, and we're partnering with the Ontario government, for instance. So we, as you've said, we're connecting half the riding. This is not an electoral promise. The program's already in place. So obviously, I'll be seeking, those who are building the networks to apply for the other half of the riding. Absolutely. And that'll be my job. And E.ON, I still believe in that project. And whether or not E.ON connects the other half of the riding, to me, I don't think Joe and Jane Porch care, as long as they get a solid internet connection. Absolutely. Francis, thank you so much. The 20 minutes, as we say, always flies by way too quickly. You talk too much. Oh, that's what it is. The questions are too long. I've got to give you the floor a little bit more. So how about I do that for the end? Let me give you the final word. Why should the voters in Glengarry-Prescott-Russell vote Liberal? Why should they vote Mr. Francis Drouin? So I've enjoyed working with everyone here locally, and I'm the only candidate out of my main rivals who lives here. And I believe that, I strongly believe if you want to represent this riding, at least live here. Fantastic, Francis, thank you. And thank you very much for watching. Make sure you go and catch all of the interviews with the candidates we had the opportunity to speak with. They're available mostly in English and in French, to the language of your choice. Go watch them, get informed, and make the best decision for yourself and for our region come Monday the 20th of September. So thank you for watching, and Francis, thank you so much for coming. Thank you.